A Course in
What?
with Cynthia Morgan.
Hey, course friends, welcome to A Course in What? I'm Cynthia Morgan, and this is a podcast in which I read and discuss the text of A Course in Miracles, and this is podcast episode number 8. And we are on chapter 1, section 3, and I think that I'm just going to go right into this section because it's kind of a long section, and I don't like these podcasts to be more than 45 minutes because I think that's plenty of time to sit down in one sitting and study A Course in Miracles. So let's just get right to it. We're on page 8, chapter 1, section 3, Atonement and Miracles. So you may remember that the atonement is a principle. If you look back to the Miracle Principles number 26 on page 5, that principle says, miracles represent freedom from fear. Atoning means undoing. The undoing of fear is an essential part of the atonement value of miracles. So when we had the thought of separation, the Course tells us that the Holy Spirit came up with a plan, and that plan is the atonement plan to undo our belief in the ego thought system. And of course, Jesus is the symbol of the Holy Spirit, and that's why this sentence number 1 in the first paragraph starts out by saying, I am in charge of the process of atonement, which I undertook to begin. Jesus has already gone through the process of undoing his ego. And that's what the atonement principle is. It's just the process of learning our lessons of forgiveness and rolling that carpet of time back up. So Jesus has already gone through those lessons, and that's why he's in charge of the process of atonement. Now, the Course is written from the perspective of where we believe we are in the world, in these separated bodies. And so it's reflecting that thought. And that's why he speaks to us in this idea of I am in charge in a form that we can understand. It's not like Jesus is sitting there, with a piece of paper deciding on who is going to undo their ego next. And it's really not like that at all. It's just, these are all symbols. And so this is just a symbol that we can work with. Jesus is a symbol of somebody who has undone their ego. In other words, it's just a symbol of love and oneness in our mind. So it's a symbol of non-ego. As we read through this, I think that's more the idea that you have to take instead of looking at this like Jesus is a man in charge of a process. Sentence 2, when you offer a miracle to any of my brothers, you do it to yourself and me. That's another way when he says to any of my brothers, that's really just meaning to anyone outside of ourselves, to our brothers, because he's one in the sonship. We are all brothers, and all minds are joined. When we shift our perception, we're contributing to that love in the sonship. And that's why we, as one of those miracle principles had said, the giver and the receiver are the same. They're both healed by the miracle. Sentence 3, the reason you come before me is that I do not need miracles for my own atonement, but I stand at the end in case you fail temporarily. That's sort of this anthropomorphic idea of seeing Jesus as a person who's standing at the end, catching us in case we fall. But really what that means is that he is that symbol, that goal for all of us of healing our mind. In sentence 4, my part in the atonement is the canceling out of all errors that you could not otherwise correct. So what he's saying is that basically we got ourselves into this mess and we need a symbol of the non-ego outside of ourselves in order to cancel out that error that we believe in right now. Sentence 5, when you have been restored to the recognition of your original state, you naturally become part of the atonement yourself. When we shift our perception about somebody, when we forgive, what it's doing is allowing us to remember that original state of love and oneness. And when we continue to shift our perception and learn those lessons of forgiveness, we naturally become a part of the atonement. Sentence 6, as you share my unwillingness to accept error in yourself and others, you must join the great crusade to correct it. Listen to my voice, learn to undo error, and act to correct it. This idea of you share my unwillingness to accept error in yourself, that's another way of saying you share my unwillingness to believe in error in yourself and others. If you're struggling with somebody in your life, if you have this unforgiveness towards that person, what it's saying is that on one level, you recognize that what you're struggling about isn't the truth about the relationship between the two. You are joined in the oneness of love. And the idea of just joining this great crusade is joining this atonement plan of correcting our ego thought system. Listen to my voice. Listen to that still small voice of love within yourself. The Course says that the ego speaks first and loudest, and the Holy Spirit or Jesus, God, is that still small voice behind the ego. Learn to undo error, and that's just practicing shifting your perception, acting to correct it. That's making that decision. So sentence 7, the power to work miracles belongs to you. In other words, the power of your decision. Will you choose to have the miracle, or will you choose to continue to stay stuck in time, in guilt, in your own ego thought system? Sentence 8, I will provide the opportunities to do them, but you must be ready and willing. To do them, meaning to do miracles. Again, it's not like Jesus is planning all of our opportunities to forgive somebody. Really, what this is saying is that we should always be alert and ready and willing to shift our perception. Those opportunities will always present themselves to us. Every day when we wake up, we have an opportunity to take that quantum leap through time and shift our perception. Sentence 9, doing them will bring conviction in the ability, because conviction comes through accomplishment. So the only way that you really understand that a miracle works and that you become happier, you become more peaceful, is if you actually practice it. Because the ego has so much resistance to forgiveness, to shifting, to love. Our ego tells us that we're better off holding on to our grievance. And there's a payoff in that for us, so we don't do it. And so the only way that you create that conviction in understanding that you're happier and you're more peaceful when you shift your perception is by actually doing it. So you don't have the conviction and then you shift your perception. You begin to practice shifting your perception, and that conviction just naturally follows. Sentence 10, the ability is the potential, the achievement is its expression, and the atonement, which is the natural profession of the children of God, is the purpose. So the natural profession, that just means that's our job. Our natural job here in the world is to undo our ego, and that's the purpose. All right, so paragraph 2, heaven and earth shall pass away, means that they will not continue to exist as separate states. So from my understanding, a lot of these quotes in the beginning, these biblical quotes, were directed towards Helen, who had an understanding of the Bible. He was directing them to her and helping her to understand a deeper meaning behind just the simple translations that were occurring in the time that she was living and the understanding of the Bible in which she was living. That's why he's also talking in first person here. Throughout A Course in Miracles, you don't see this much personal reference to Jesus. As a matter of fact, this is kind of it, the last section and this section. And then he rarely uses I or talks about himself. But again, in the beginning, you have to remember that all of a sudden, Helen was scribing Jesus. And so she had a lot of questions, and he presented himself as this human being, I, in the form that she could understand from her understanding of the Bible at that time. And so that's why in the beginning you see a lot of this reference to the Bible and these statements, but it kind of ends after this throughout the rest of the Course. So in that first sentence, heaven and earth shall pass away, saying that they won't continue to exist as separate states. And what that means is that Heaven, if you may recall, is just a state of oneness. And so that state of oneness can be anywhere. You don't die and go to a place where you find oneness. You find that oneness, that connection to everyone and everything in your mind here as you're walking on earth. Sentence 2, my word, which is the resurrection and the life, shall not pass away, because life is eternal. By my word, what he's saying is what I stand for, what I represent, which is eternal, resurrecting of the ego thought system, and life, meaning an eternal, ever-existing life, shall not pass away. Sentence 3, you are the work of God, and his work is wholly lovable and wholly loving. That's always been one of my favorite sentences in A Course in Miracles, and I actually use that as an affirmation in hypnosis to clients all the time. I tell them to say, I am wholly lovable and wholly loving. And I often say that to people in hypnosis, you are wholly lovable and wholly loving, especially if somebody is holding on to a lot of guilt or shame, or thinking that they're a bad person connected to something that they physically did in the past. To remind them of their innocence, as it's saying here, you are the work of God. Sentence 4, this is how a man must think of himself in his heart, because this is what he is. That is the truth of all of us. And that's what we're doing when we have that miracle, when we decide to shift our perception about somebody in our lives, is we're recognizing that they too are the work of God, which is undoubtedly really hard to do when you're holding on to grievances. And that's why you just have to take that little faith and say, okay, I'm going to let go of being right in this situation and allow myself to recognize that there's another way of perceiving this person. And if I choose to perceive this person differently, then I'm going to have a positive result. I'm going to get benefit from this. I'm going to heal and feel better. Paragraph 3, the forgiven are the means of the atonement. In other words, the forgiven are those who remember that they are forgiven. Those who remember their innocence and the truth that only love is real are the means of undoing the ego thought system. Sentence 2, being filled with spirit, they forgive in return. If you remember that oneness, there's nothing else to do but to forgive. It's only when we're stuck in our ego thought system that all these other options come up of holding grievances or acting in a mean or cruel way, etc. Sentence 3, those who are released must join in releasing their brothers, for this is the plan of the atonement. And I think I talked about that. Sentence 4, miracles are the way in which minds that serve the Holy Spirit unite with me for the salvation or release of all of God's creations. So again, miracles are the tool that we use in undoing our ego thought system or rolling that carpet of time back up, which is the atonement plan. Paragraph 4, I am the only one who can perform miracles indiscriminately because I am the atonement. What he's saying is that we don't really know what we're doing. And so that's why he keeps saying, I'm in charge. I can perform this. It's like that idea in recovery, your best thinking got you here. Our best thinking got us to where we are, stuck in the ego thought system. So he's saying, let go of being your own teacher and allow me to take that place. Sentence 2, you have a role in the atonement, which I will dictate to you. Sentence 3, ask me which miracles you should perform. Sentence 4, this spares you needless effort because you will be acting under direct communication. That's just another way of saying, I'm going to let go of what I think is right and ask Jesus or the Holy Spirit in my mind what I need to do in each situation. What you're doing when you ask is you're allowing, you're willing to let that light in. When you're asking for a miracle, you are bringing your problem to the Holy Spirit or to the light or to God, to the love in your mind. And that's what heals. And from that space, you then naturally know what to do. So he keeps asking in different ways here. It's a little confusing, but he's really, in a nutshell, he's just saying, resign as your own teacher, for you have been badly taught. You've been taught by your ego. You need a new teacher now. So ask me. Ask for help. I'm here. Keep coming to the love in your mind and ask what to do. This spares you needless effort because you will be acting under direct communication, meaning you'll be acting under direct communication with the Holy Spirit rather than your ego. Sentence 5, the impersonal nature of the miracle is an essential ingredient because it enables me to direct its application, and under my guidance, miracles lead to the highly personal experience of revelation. The impersonal nature of the miracle, that goes back to those miracle principles. If you'll remember that the first principle, there's no order of difficulty in miracles. One isn't bigger or harder than another. They're all the same. They're all impersonal. If you can shift your perception about one thing, you can shift your perception about another. It's just our ego which fragments, and that is what the ego does. The ego is based in separation. So the ego will fragment into hierarchies that, oh, I can shift my perception about this person, but not this person who really hurt me, or whatever. I can shift my perception about a cold, but I can't shift my perception about cancer. This is saying the miracle is impersonal. A shift in perception heals everything all the time. And those shifts in perception in the second half of that sentence lead to that highly personal experience of revelation that we talked about. Revelation is that direct experience with God that spiritual seekers often seek. It's a mystical experience. We can't sustain revelation because it's too scary for us. We get glimpses of it, as I've talked about, driving in the car, walking down the street, whatever you're doing, and all of a sudden you have that experience of oneness with God. But they're always temporary because we have too much fear built up against God and against love right now in order to sustain that. But every time we shift our perception, we're getting closer and closer to what you might think of as a sustained revelation at some point. Sentence 6, a guide does not control, but he does direct, leaving it up to you to follow. So he's saying that the choice is yours. I'm going to guide you, but you need to make that decision on whether or not you want to follow. Sentence 7, lead us not into temptation means recognize your errors and choose to abandon them by following my guidance. Recognize your errors means recognize where you've chosen to hold on to the ego thought system. Where are you holding on to fear? Where are you holding on to anxiety in your life? Where are you holding on to unforgiveness? Recognize those errors and choose to abandon all of them by following my guidance. Paragraph 5, error cannot really threaten truth, which can always withstand it. So your error in thinking, choosing to think with the ego, can't really threaten God. And in sentence 2, only the error is actually vulnerable because the ego is always temporary. The ego is not eternal. So it will always be vulnerable. And that's actually why the ego speaks first and loudest. Our ego is terrified that at some point it will disappear. And that's why we're all holding on to this ego thought system so strongly. Sentence 3, you are free to establish your kingdom where you see fit, but the right choice is inevitable if you remember this. Spirit is in a state of grace forever. Your reality is only spirit. Therefore, you are in a state of grace forever. When it says you're free to establish your kingdom where you see fit, that just means you can choose at any time to think with the Holy Spirit or to think with your ego, to think with love or to think with fear. But the right choice, it says, is always inevitable if you remember that spirit is in a state of grace forever. Your reality is only spirit. Therefore, you are in a state of grace forever. That's another way of saying nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. Continuing with sentence 7, atonement undoes all errors in this respect and thus uproots the source of fear. So again, the source of fear in our lives and in our minds has nothing to do with the external world, even though that's really hard to believe. Like if somebody comes to me and they have a phobia of needles, let's say, I don't necessarily tell them, oh, this is a fear of God, but I recognize that on some level, that this is a manifestation of that fear. The truth is that all fear is this fear of our power, of our strength, of who we really are in our lives. And that source of fear is never in the world. It's never really the needle. It's never whatever we pretend it to be. Sentence 8, whenever you experience God's reassurances as threat, it is always because you are defending misplaced or misdirected loyalty. So God's reassurances is what Jesus just said here. Spirit is in a state of grace forever. Your reality is only spirit. Therefore, you are in a state of grace forever. That's God's reassurances. And whenever we experience that as a threat, Jesus is saying, it's because we have a misplaced loyalty. We are placing our loyalty in the ego thought system. 9, when you project this to others, you imprison them, but only to the extent to which you reinforce errors they have already made. I think this is the first time that this word project comes up. I could be wrong, but projection is always a reference to the ego thought system. And extend or extension is always a reference in the Course to the Holy Spirit. So anytime you see this word project or projection, it's talking about the ego. When we had this thought of separation, we then felt guilty. So anytime we align ourselves to the ego, there's a part of us that feels guilty because we believe that we have abandoned God. And so once you have that guilt in your mind, we then always project out that guilt because it's too scary for us to hold on to. It's too hurtful and painful, and we suffer from that guilt. The ego tells us to get rid of it, to project that guilt onto somebody else. So we're always projecting blame. We become victims and victimizers. We end up seeing the source of our problem in the world or in other people. But anytime we project out that guilt, it's always stemming from this fear. So when it says in that sentence, when you project this to others, you imprison them, but only to the extent that they allow you to, is basically what the rest of that sentence is saying. So somebody first has to decide that they are a separated, guilty sinner as well in order to accept that projection that you've made onto them. Of course, using Jesus as an extreme example, even in a crucifixion, projecting that guilt onto him, it didn't really work because he didn't believe in it. He was at one with the Holy Spirit. And so that's why it says, to the extent which you reinforce errors they have already made. If they've already made that decision in their mind that they're separate, then of course you create a whole can of worms and there's attack and defense and it just goes on and on and on. But if somebody has a healed mind, then they won't accept that error that you're projecting onto them. Sentence 10, this makes them vulnerable to the distortions of others since their own perception of themselves is distorted. So conversely, if somebody, usually it's true that we all don't have healed minds, and if somebody projects blame onto us, then we usually attack back in some way, or we take it personally, or we feel bad, or we internalize it, or whatever that is. And that's what he's saying here. This makes them vulnerable to the distortions of others since their own perception, since my perception of myself is already distorted. Sentence 11, the miracle worker can only bless them, and this undoes their distortions and frees them from prison. So if instead of projecting guilt, I extend this love and forgiveness, then I become a miracle worker. And that blesses and undoes my perception of my ego thought system, and it also undoes theirs or yours and frees us from prison, which is the ego. Paragraph 6. You respond to what you perceive, and as you perceive, so shall you behave. Sentence 2, the golden rule asks you to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Sentence 3, this means that the perception of both must be accurate. Sentence 4, the golden rule is the rule for appropriate behavior. Sentence 5, you cannot behave appropriately unless you perceive appropriately. Sentence 6, since you and your neighbor are equal members of one family, as you perceive both, so will you do to both. Sentence 7, you should look out from the perception of your own holiness to the holiness of others. He was basically just talking about this golden rule, so I just kept reading because I think I would have chopped it up too much. So the golden rule is, of course, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And so basically he's saying, see them as your brother, see the oneness in that person instead of seeing them as separate from you. Okay, let's continue on. I think that is pretty self-explanatory at this point. Paragraph 7, miracles arise from a mind that is ready for them. You can't be in your ego thought system. There's a famous line of A Course in Miracles that has been turned into all kinds of other lines by different people. And that is, do you prefer that you be right or happy? And so you can't have both. You can't be right and needing to be right and be in your ego thought system and be happy. In other words, be at peace. The ego always needs justification. The ego is always seeking to be right. So you can't have a miracle from a mind that is needing to be right. Miracles arise from a mind that's ready for them, a mind that says, I'm willing to have my perception healed. I'm willing to look at this situation differently. I don't need to be right anymore about this person. Sentence 2, by being united, this mind goes out to everyone, even without the awareness of the miracle worker himself. So that's just another way of saying that sometimes we don't see the actual result of shifting our perception. It's not even in our awareness. Sentence 3, the impersonal nature of miracles is because the atonement itself is one, uniting all creations with their creator. There's only one solution to the one problem of separation, and that is going back to your mind and remembering that principle that only love is real. And in that principle that unites all creations with the Creator. Sentence 4, as an expression of what you truly are, the miracle places the mind in a state of grace. Sentence 5, the mind then naturally welcomes the host within and the stranger without. So the host within is the Holy Spirit or Jesus, and that's why it's capitalized. And the stranger without is that person that you didn't recognize as your brother, that you saw as someone separate from you. Sentence 6, when you bring in the stranger, he becomes your brother. So when you recognize that you're one with him, when you bring him into your mind, into that place of peace and love. Paragraph 8, that the miracle may have effects on your brothers that you may not recognize is not your concern. Sentence 2, the miracle will always bless you. Sentence 3, miracles you are not asked to perform have not lost their value. Sentence 4, they are still expressions of your own state of grace, but the action aspect of the miracle should be controlled by me because of my complete awareness of the whole plan. And this goes back to him just asking us to ask him which miracles we should perform. In other words, just going back into our mind. And it's not like we say, should I forgive this person or shouldn't I forgive this person? It's just another way of saying, I'm going to give up as my teacher and ask you to heal my mind through shifting it with this miracle. Sentence 5, the impersonal nature of miracle-mindedness ensures your grace, but only I am in a position to know where they can be bestowed. And I think I just talked about that. Paragraph 9. Miracles are selective only in the sense that they are directed towards those who can use them for themselves. In other words, those who are ready for them. Sentence 2. Since this makes it inevitable that they will extend them to others, a strong chain of atonement is wielded. That's the idea that those miracles then roll the carpet of time back up. This strong chain begins to occur. It's like a daisy chain. We shift our perception, and that begins to heal the sonship, and maybe that person then shifts their perception, etc., etc. Sentence 3. However, this selectivity takes no account of the magnitude of the miracle itself, because the concept of size exists on a plane that is itself unreal. And that, once again, is referring to that fragmentation of the ego, the hierarchy of miracles or problems that we have in the world. The miracle doesn't take any of that into consideration because, once again, there's only one problem and one solution. Sentence 4, since the miracle aims at restoring the awareness of reality, it would not be useful if it were bound by laws that govern the error it aims to correct. So in other words, the laws of fragmentation and separation, the laws of the illusion in this world, the things that we perceive as bigger or smaller or harder or easier. The miracle bypasses all of that. And of course, it needs to in order to restore our mind back to the one solution, which is the correction of the ego, that thought system of love in our mind. Okay, so before we finish with the podcast, we have finished this section 3, Atonement and Miracles, but I want you, if you have a book in front of you, to turn to page 55 in the Manual for Teachers. It's question number 22, and I want to just read that first paragraph because I think that will be helpful in understanding the atonement even more. And that question is, how are healing and atonement related? And I'll just read this first paragraph. Healing and atonement are not related. They are identical. There is no order of difficulty in miracles because there are no degrees of atonement. It is the one complete concept possible in this world because it is the source of a wholly unified perception. Partial atonement is a meaningless idea, just as special areas of hell in heaven are inconceivable. Accept atonement and you are healed. Atonement is the word of God. Accept His word and what remains to make sickness possible. Accept His word and every miracle has been accomplished. To forgive is to heal. The teacher of God has taken accepting the atonement for himself as his only function. What is there then he cannot heal? What miracle can be withheld from him? And I don't really want to get into it right now, but the teacher of God is, just so you understand, it doesn't mean that it's somebody who actually teaches A Course in Miracles or has some certification. A teacher of God in A Course in Miracles is someone who demonstrates the principles of A Course in Miracles. So in that sentence 10, it says, the teacher of God has taken accepting the atonement for himself as his only function. He's demonstrating that atonement principle, that nothing really happened. All right. So if you have any question about anything that I just read or said, feel free to email me at acourseinwhat@gmail.com, and you can contact me through Facebook. It's facebook.com/Cynthia Morgan Hypnotherapy, and also on my website, cynthiamorgan.us. There is a podcast section which just has a contact form, and that's maybe the easiest way to send me a question or a comment or anything you would like to discuss. I would love to hear from you, and I would love to attempt to answer your questions. So if you want to say the summary of A Course in Miracles with me, that would be great. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God.